Hello everyone, a warm welcome and a heartfelt namaste. I, Anuradha Sharda, would like to thank you for liking the videos, writing in your suggestions and your comments, and subscribing to the channel. Today we have a guest with us, Lars Panaro. Lars is by profession a musician and by passion an astrologer. Welcome aboard, Lars.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Lars, first and foremost, how would a musician translate into an astrologer?
Well, for me, it occurred because the harp teacher where I attended music school, who was an associate dean, she also was a lifelong astrologer, and she was a Western astrologer, but she taught a sort of impromptu astrology course at the school that you could actually take for a little bit of college credit. It was just sort of like a general college credit. And so I just, some friends of mine were taking the course, and they looked at my chart and they told me some kind of little tidbits of whatever they knew. And I thought, this sounds really interesting. It sounds like there's something here. And I had been starting to learn about people like Carl Jung, and I was studying a little bit of psychology. I had just started reading a pretty famous book called The Four Agreements, and I was just kind of having sort of doing a 180 in my life and starting to open up to new things. And so I took the astrology course, and I became good friends with the teacher, and she turned me on to all kinds of stuff, which in turn eventually led me to many other things, and a lot of those things being Indian occultism and religion and metaphysics. And so eventually I came to Jyotish, but that's kind of the very short story, is the harp teacher where I went to school.
Right. So do you feel any synchronicity between music and astrology?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of synchronicity. In fact, maybe one day I'll do this, but I thought about writing or doing some kind of series on music theory and astrology, because just like we have the 7 major planets, we also have
Seven notes.
7 notes and 7 scales and 7 chords. At least in the Western system. In the Eastern systems, you guys have got notes between notes, and so it's a little
But then
bit
we
more.
still have the 7 major notes.
Do
The
you?
major
Okay.
notes are still the 7 major notes. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I've only studied a tiny bit of Indian and Middle Eastern music. So anyway, yeah, there's quite a lot lines up there, and of course, there's the saying, the music of the spheres, and this notion that every being is emitting some kind of frequency, is vibrating at some kind of frequency, and then fundamentally the frequency of the pranava, the om. So everything is music, everything's rhythm, everything's harmony, and so it goes pretty deep, I would say.
Yes. Thank you so much. So what is it that now you were just telling me that you also are very enamored by Prashna. So what is it about Prashna that catches your attention?
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit again to music. And in college, I started doing a lot of free improvisation, where you sit down to play music that is not written, and that you don't have any idea what you're going to play until you start playing it. And in fact, my senior recital was like a structured improvisation based on the 12 signs of the zodiac that I did with some friends. Yeah. So I was experimenting a lot with improvisation. And again, my harp astrology teacher was also an avid improviser. So I studied improvisation with her. And the thing I like so much about Prashna is that it's of the moment, just like improvisation. So it's just specific to that moment. And I think there's just something incredibly magical about its simplicity and its clarity. And when I first started studying older systems of astrology, like, because I started out with more modern stuff, and this was about maybe 5 years ago, I started really getting into older traditions. I actually started with a book on medical horary astrology, and that was my entry into all of these different ancient traditions. And so I found that by learning horary, which is Prashna in India, right? I was able to tell people the answers to their questions quite accurately. And the more I experimented and practiced the methodology, I was like, wow, so I can really get very accurate results, and it's very simple. You know, if you're just asking a question about a job, you just need to focus on the 10th house, right? You don't need to look at all of the houses. If you're just asking a question about a relationship, you mainly focus on the 7th house and Venus and so on. And I think that's what I liked about it so much, is like I wasn't getting lost in the rest of the chart. And so you know, now I've figured out a way to translate all that to reading birth charts too. But in the beginning, there was just this majestic simplicity to Prashna, and I still love that. You know, I find you can do a whole reading with just a Prashna chart if you have to. You don't even need anything else.
It's a
So,
beautiful thing. So what are you going to teach us about Prashna today?
well, I guess my biggest thing with Prashna these days is using it in conjunction with a birth chart to give a reading. And so, you know, when I do a reading, I'll just show an example here. Let me just hide the name real quick. But like this is oftentimes what I'll do, and this will be my main reference, is I will just write out the birth chart, the Navamsha, and then the Prashna for when that person, it's for when that person asked for the reading. Usually it's not for the time of the consultation, though if I forgot the time of when they asked, then I will just do it for the time of the consultation and work from there. But basically the Prashna does a few things in contrast to the birth chart. It can help you narrow down what the person is really concerned about during that reading, right? And it also shows you the transits as well, the predominant transits.
Right.
With the exception of perhaps the moon, right, which might be different for the day you do the consultation. But so you have a reference for like what's really hitting them right now, what's really so important to them right now. And one of the ways that the Prashna chart will do this is that oftentimes you'll have the same ascendant as the person's chart.
Yeah.
It's very common. Or you'll have let's say a person has Rahu rising, right? Then Rahu rising may be in the Prashna chart again. Or recently I had a situation where I was looking at this person's Mars in the 8th house because it was very afflicted in Cancer. And so I was thinking about that, and then I looked back at the Prashna and I noticed Mars was once again in the 8th house, but in the Prashna. You know, so you find these little kernels of repetition, and then that allows you to kind of narrow your focus, at least in the beginning of the reading.
It's a very beautiful take. So the Prashna, you can start with the Prashna and you can go ahead with the birth chart. And any instances where you find that the Prashna has worked like magic for you, but you've been stuck with the birth chart?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Like, let's see, I did a reading for this woman, and, you know, I got things from the Prashna that I would not have gotten from the birth chart, simple things, but like, in the Prashna chart, I think I saw that Venus had just moved into the 12th house. So it was in like the first degree of the 12th house. And I believe it was also ruling the 7th. And I asked them if they had recently gotten out of a relationship, and a couple years ago they had gotten divorced, for instance. But I also found that when they were asking me about what to do concerning their employment, you know, like, you know, what kind of job should I be doing now because I have these options and so on. I tried looking at the birth chart, but it wasn't really speaking to me. So I looked at the Prashna, and I was able to give them more cogent advice based on what was happening for them now. Because, the birth chart is really going to give these very broad strokes. And we can use things like the dashas to narrow stuff down. But I often find that the Prashna is just a quicker method to use. And I also find that when you draw out the charts like I've done, it's kind of a type of Prashna in itself. Because what happens is that if you do it methodically and with this intention of focusing on the person and the reading, you will find that how you
the chart,
yes,
yes,
right, it does, and how you draw it too. Like this one, for example, like if we just look at the Prashna here, you'll notice that the bottom where I drew it is not very straight, for example.
right.
And so, that will tell me something about the person in the chart. I have a better example actually too. This one was really interesting, where when I drew it, you'll see this here in the Navamsha. Okay, see how tiny I made the 6th house, or the 8th house, I mean,
Yeah.
and how big I made the 6th house.
Yeah.
And this has never happened before. This is totally unique to this one time that I drew it. And that was like hugely important to me. So I utilized that as a kind of omen to read the chart.
It's a very beautiful thing. And just to share my experience in that, when I was, this was exactly what was told to me when I was studying Prashna 15 years ago. And the teacher, when she was drawing, she forgot to draw a line between the 5th house and the 6th house, the 4th house and the 5th house in the South Indian system. So I quickly asked her that, are you thinking about your children and your mother? And she started laughing and she said, yes, I've left my children with my mother and I had to come to attend this class. So it's so beautiful that, your mind thought process actually can reflect in a Prashna chart.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great story. So yes, it's exactly that. And if I have the person with me, doing the reading, then I will have them draw the shape of the chart as well. And that oftentimes is even more revealing because they drew it. And so one time, former friend of mine, they drew their chart out because they did astrology, and they drew it in the circular pattern, the modern, like Western pattern. And it was so bizarre because it's like, I think it was like the 5th house was tiny and the 4th house was huge. And there was a situation where like there wasn't a center to the chart. Somehow the center was absent, like the way they drew the cross. And this person had been having major issues with their home for many years. Their home had been flooded and there was mold, and they had been kind of hoarding things. So they had a lot of issues with the home. And with the 5th house so tiny, they did not know how to take risks and have fun, is what I found, So it's really I think that, yeah, I think the value in using a Prashna chart and having them draw things out, and then also getting into omens as well, because there's kind of a fine line between the two. It makes the reading more tangible, makes it more here and now, and not so ephemeral.
And if you notice, both of us have been talking about the 4th and the 5th house in our examples. So the 4th house and 5th house for me stood for something else, and 4th house and 5th house for you, because it is our perception combined with the situation. So everything makes such a lot of difference, and Prashna gives such beautiful answers to every one of it.
Exactly, yeah.
So this is one beautiful tip that you gave us, was when we're doing it by hand, when we see an anomaly in the Prashna chart, even if it is by the way of the diagram that we have drawn, then we must consider the anomaly. We must take it into account. Any other tidbit that you want to give to our audience as to how do we, what are the small kernels of Prashna that you would definitely take and highlight or take into consideration?
Well, I think that if you want to get, like, if one wants to get a little bit more technical with it, which I think is great to do in the beginning, or when you're feeling stuck, right? Like, think about what house is the first house in, sorry, take the lagna of the Prashna chart and see what house that is in the Kundali, you know? So if that's the 8th house, right, then the person may be dealing with 8th house things. If it's the 5th house things, and so on. I think also, as with any chart, the moon is going to be really vitally important in the Prashna, right? So you can look at where the moon is in the Prashna by itself, or you can look at also, again, where the moon is transiting relative to the birth chart. And you could even go as far as, where is it transiting relative to Navamsha and stuff like that as well. So there's just sort of all kinds of layers you can peel back. These days, I don't follow any sort of fixed methodology. I just go where I feel drawn to go with the techniques. So sometimes I'm, really strongly drawn to the images associated with the decanates, which are the
Yes.
how do you say it in Sanskrit again? Drakana, yeah.
Yes.
The Drakana, right? And I like the images from the Yavana Jataka, for example.
Yes.
So
Yavana Jataka has very beautiful images. Yes.
Oh yeah, exquisite, and it also has great descriptions of character as well for those Drakana images. But I just bring this up because it's like it ties into this, because it's just about, at a certain point you have to just go towards what is hooking your attention. So you have to really be feeling the chart, and you have to be feeling what's going on. And so sometimes you'll hear it from the ethers, like, oh, you ought to look at the Drakana, right, instead of the nakshatra, maybe for that time. Other times I focus on the nakshatra, or other times it just sort of depends on what the person starts talking about. I might see something in the prashna and then go, oh, I wonder how their dog is doing, or something like that, and then they start talking about their dog. And so then I go back to the prashna and look at, I usually use the 6th house for animals. So I look at the 6th house and see what's going on there. And, then that kind of gets into the omenology of things, the shakuna, because, what does the dog represent for that person? What does the dog represent in general? And so on and so forth. Dogs will represent a variety of things depending on the context. And I know that in a lot of Indian art, the dogs can represent the Vedas, for example. But more generally, the dogs represent things like loyalty, friendship, and love. So so then that might lead you to the 11th house of friendship. And things start to kind of unfold. And a lot of times people are not, they're getting a reading because they're confused about something, and so they're not always directly aware. And one thing I experimented with a while back was I would draw 12 tarot cards in a circle for the 12 houses. And I remember I was doing a reading once, and the 11th house had I think it had the 5 of Wands, which is a very tumultuous card.
Yes, I know. I practice tarot.
Great, wonderful, yeah. And so I had the 5 of Wands. So I asked, did you recently get into a fight with a friend? And they said, oh no. And then I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm just wrong. And then about an hour later, they were like, and yeah, my friend of 30 years and I recently had a falling out. And I'm just like, in my head, I'm like doing this because people just don't, a lot of times they're so, they're clouded, right? And they're not focused. And that's probably why they're getting the reading, right? So they don't hear what you're saying. And then later it comes out. And so it's just interesting how that has happened a lot. So that's kind of a tangent, but I would say that when you start really practicing this stuff, trust the chart over the person. Really get to trust the chart and the omens and all that over the person. And don't argue with the person that you're reading for, but just don't be put off by the possibility that they're going to tell you you're wrong. Because
Okay.
that will happen.
So that's a very beautiful thing that you just said. You said that the omens can be, I mean, it will take probably because you have a musician's mind, which is an artistic mind, which is free flowing. So
Mhm.
you do take into account everything that is free flowing. And from the sixth house to the dog, to the connecting it to the 11th house of friendship, loyalty, and you can walk there. That's a very good part because I think Prashna uses a lot of your gut feelings. It uses a
Mhm.
lot of your uh, instincts also. And because you're instinctually drawn to the chart, having made it with your hands, I think that works a lot in your favor. Don't you think so?
Absolutely. And it's kind of endless how it can work. Like one time I forgot to write in a planet, and so I found that was significant of something. I don't remember exactly what, but it's like, oh, I forgot to write in that planet, so I need to contemplate that as I read this person's chart. What does that mean?
So that planet that you did not kind of put in there must have made a difference for you because in the reading of the chart. So that is something that comes very intuitively. Do you have anything to work, as I had said earlier, that it's about probably the intuition and the free flowing and you being open to everything. So how does intuition, how do you think intuition plays a role in our Prashna reading?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, and this is something I've been exploring a lot in my own life, and of course in readings as well. And so, I guess it kind of comes back to something called the Jyotir Vidya, which is kind of like it's like the spirit of the art of astrology, and all these things, everything we do has kind of a spirit or a consciousness that is behind it or controls it. Same with the tarot cards and whatnot. So basically, there's an excellent book, Light on Life by Hart Defoe and Robert Svoboda. It's like one of the best modern textbooks on Jyotish, and they talk quite about the Jyotir Vidya in it for anybody listening who wants to read more about that. But when I first read about that, I didn't really understand it, and then it's only recently that I started to realize it's like, you can treat astrology like a good friend. And if you treat it like a good friend, you can start to have a conversation with it and it will start to tell you things. And you just have to know how to listen. And it's not always such a literal thing. So I think that's where intuition starts to really enter into the practice, is being receptive to not so much the chart, but the astrology as a whole, what the astrology has to tell you and what it directs you toward. And that really does transcend the chart. And so on the one hand, I think that a lot of this comes through kind of a lunar portal of really feeling and being nonlinear and being very receptive, just kind of going with the flow and not trying to be so logical. For example, a lot of astrologers, especially in the West, will have kind of a rigid approach. Like, first I look at the ascendant, then I look at the ascendant lord, then I look at the sun, then I look at the moon, then I talk about this, and they've got this list of, they just approach every chart that way. I've never had any success doing that. It's always felt very artificial. So finally, I just gave into the fact that I wasn't going to do things that way. And I started to just do the types of things I talked about just previous to this, with the prashna and with drawing things out and just kind of letting it speak to me, letting it flow. So that's one level. And then the other level is perhaps a more solar level of just like a knowing, where you just suddenly know something. You didn't have to arrive at it by feeling or by thinking. It's more just like kind of a fiery strike of lightning. You just know, right? And those, in my experiences, those are a little bit rarer. Maybe for some people that's right there, but I think that's kind of like the highest form of doing divination, and that is like the type of thing probably that people like Sri Yukteswar was able to do when he tells Yogananda about all this stuff, but he's not even looking at his chart. It's like, oh, this guy's going to have an accident in 6 months, you need to get him to wear this astrological bangle and blah blah blah. That's just like that lightning intuition that seers and high yogis have and stuff. So that's kind of the other end of it. But at that point, you don't even really need the astrology to do that. So basically we have kind of those two approaches to the intuition, the feeling and the knowing, but it starts with a conversation with the universe and the Jyotirvidya specifically.
And we all know that the universe does not speak out like you and I. It doesn't speak in the terms of ABCD. It speaks in terms of its own, we can call it omen, we can call it chakuna, we can call it any which thing in any which language. But
Right.
It has its own way of sending out signals. So do you believe in omens?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Omens are in some ways one of my favorite ways to do readings, but also just to interact with the world. And there are so many layers to omens. And I am not formally trained in the art of omenology. I actually have just discovered there are many great texts on Shakuna from India. So at some point I may investigate those. But the nice thing about omenology is you don't have to be trained so rigidly, at least not in the beginning, because if you really just look at what's happening around you, whether it's nature, whether it's through a person, or even through an electronic device, right, you can start to get the sense of the omens. So I'll give a really fun example. Is one day a friend and I were driving together. We were going to go for a walk in the mountains, and he was saying, well, should we go get our friend Blake? And I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure. I just couldn't make a decision. And in front of us, there was a car that's license plate said, "Go Sims." And my friend Jesse, who is also a tarot reader, and he was driving, he said, that means we should go get Blake because his last name is Sims. And so we did go get Blake, and it turned out to be an excellent day with the three of us that I don't think it would have been nearly as fun if we hadn't done that. So that's like a really obvious one. That's a really simple one. But I think they're often like that, they really are. And, then you have all the animal symbolism and the winds and the directions. And there's that whole system of each planet is a different direction, and each direction has a different deity.
Yeah, but that's not omen. But the omen is something you just said now. It's beautiful. Omens, you can read omens even with a small child moving by with something in his or her hand, and we know what it's going to be. Right? So omen again in Prashna. That's very impromptu Prashna. It does help a lot. Yes.
Yeah, most definitely.
It was a real interesting session, Lars. So we learned a lot of things from Lars. First and foremost, we learned that when you're drawing by the hand, it's very beautiful, because when you're drawing by the hand, you need to check out if there's any discrepancy, anomaly out there, and pay attention to it, as Lars did with his Navamsh, and he did have a funny time with it. So then let your intuition go wild. Do not put brakes on your intuition, because it is definitely going to lead you to the place you were supposed to be. And finally, omens, a very beautiful way to read the Prashna. Thank you so much, Lars, for this.
All right, thank you.
And may the musician within you grow to be one of the most beautiful, astrologers ever there. Thank you so much, Lars.